Really excited about wrapping up today's session. We've covered today from very site-specific examples or very localized issues you may be struggling with, and we've now kind of transitioned to some global kind of conversations. But how do we make those connections? How do we connect the globe to the field? And so we're very fortunate to have a team from the International Ranger Federation that's going to share with us today. And I'm going to let them all introduce themselves. So there's a team of them. And also, where you're located. We actually have representatives from all around the world and spanning not just space, but also time. Amanda is in Australia, and it's actually Wednesday already there. And so I'll pass it over to Monica and the team as I stop my screen share and hand it over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having us here. We're very excited to be here today at the end of day one. And it's not just me, it's just the whole team of, well, not the whole team of IRF, but we have very interesting people. We have our IRF president, Chris Galliers, that will be starting with his presentation soon. And then we'll also have, since we're talking about ranger associations and the role they have, Amanda Dudgeon from Australia is going to share us from the Oceania perspective, all the struggles, all the challenges they've been having, but also their successes in creating the steps or the milestones for our regional association that at this point North America does not have, and we are very excited and very looking forward to have our regional associations in North America at some point. And later, after Chris and Amanda have gone, we'll leave some space for our IRF representative from North America, that is Mark Caughlan. And Dusty will from the US Forest Service will share us a bit of words as well from their perspective on how they see this momentum of regional associations and ranger associations and their role. I want to introduce you formally to Chris Galliers, our IRF president today. And Chris is a member from the Game Ranger Association of Africa and was also chairman, serving 2 terms in GRAA, or Game Rangers Association of Africa, that it's a regional body or the regional association of rangers in Africa. He was elected at the Africa representative to the IRF, or International Ranger Federation, in 2012, and then he was elected president of the IRF in 2019 and 2024. Alongside his work as IRF president, he works for Conservation Outcomes in South Africa, which is a non-for-profit organization created to support land that is being developed and managed for biodiversity conservation outside the traditional state protected areas. So Chris, without further introduction, I would like to give you the floor for your presentation on the role of ranger associations. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And as Monica said, and as Dusty said, a number of us from IRF are scattered around the world. I am based in South Africa. I'm actually in a protected area at the moment. And it's really a great opportunity to be able to present on, from the IRF perspective, but also on this subject. I think the first thing that I'm going to do is just give a brief introduction to the IRF. I think it's very important. It'll give context to the subject about ranger associations as well. First of all, there's in terms of the International Ranger Federation, we have a mission which is to develop, advance, and promote throughout the world community the ranger profession and its critical role in conservation of natural and cultural resources, and that's very important. On the right-hand side is our new strategy for the federation, which has 3 pillars focused on the advancement of the ranger profession, and then also in terms of ranger networks and learning, which is sort of central to what we're talking about in the value of ranger associations. And then obviously just about the organization, and then central to that is the 30 by 30 targets and the global biodiversity framework. We have a vision, quite a lengthy vision for any organization, but I think it captures everything that we would like for the Ranger Federation, and that is to have a world where rangers are recognized, valued, respected, and supported as key guardians of the planet's natural and cultural heritage, through our shared commitment and collective action, we seek to build a future where the diverse ranger workforce has the conditions, capacity, and resources to carry out their vital work in a safe and supportive environment. And that's very, very important as well in terms of what we're trying to do, but also trying to, for the ranger associations themselves to assist in driving that at a sort of a more grassroots level, driving building capacity, improved conditions, and resourcing the rangers on the ground. And obviously, our vision is of a world where rangers as professionals work in close collaboration with governments, local communities, Indigenous people, and other stakeholders in an accountable manner to safeguard heritage for society and future generations. Now, in terms of when we are talking about a ranger, what do we mean? I think it's important to understand that rangers are not just people necessarily in uniforms in a formal state employed position. They can be also employed at a communal or carrying out just the functions of a ranger, and that is safeguarding nature and cultural and historical heritage and protecting the rights and well-being of future generations. Now, we've got a definition which is actually included in our code of conduct, and this is what we have come up with as the official sort of definition of a ranger, which again talks to more about the role of ranger rather than who employs or what entity employs that person, because it could be someone who is part of an Indigenous community. It could be a privately employed by an NGO, as well as the state. But that person carries out a range of tasks. Also, we must remember that around the world, the term ranger is not necessarily understood as it's defined here. There are many different terms for ranger: forest officer, forest guards, field officer, and obviously we mustn't forget that we also have rangers in the marine and aquatic environments as well. So just sort of bringing it down to the IRF in terms of its membership and associations, we have 215 members from all around the world. Of those, there are 136 ranger associations, and that number continues to grow. But we have good representation from around the world. And then just looking at the structure of the IRF, I think it's quite important when we see that we've got different kinds of associations. We've got obviously the IRF board. Beneath that, we've got regional bodies, regional representatives, and the regional associations, which are essentially our regional bodies. And that is in Africa, the Game Rangers Association of Africa; in Asia, the Ranger Federation of Asia; Europe, the European Ranger Federation; North America, as we mentioned, has not got one yet. Central America and South America are lumped now under the Latin American Ranger Federation. And then there is Oceania, and Amanda is going to be talking to us about that. And then within that, we've got within each of those regional associations, there's a number of national and subnational ranger associations as well. So that's the structure that we have. It helps us for many reasons to have that regional structure, because those regions can more effectively and efficiently communicate with the national and subnational associations. We have also those regional associations play a very important role in convening the networking value out of that membership role. So here we've got different congresses taking place, regional congresses. So on the top left of your screen is the last European Ranger Federation gathering. Then there was the Asia Ranger Congress, which took place, the African Ranger Congress, and then the one in Oceania that took place as well. Then there was the formation, which was sort of almost a congress of sorts, a regional congress, but it was the coming together and formation of the Latin American Ranger Federation, and that took place last year. Also, as a sort of a convening entity, part of enhancing the networking value is the World Ranger Congress, which IRF partners with a Ranger Association, usually at a national level, to host and run a World Ranger Congress. We've had 11 of them so far, 10 of them so far, and we are going into the 11th one. The 11th one, which is upcoming in 2027, and is going to be in Argentina, which is really exciting. And we're working with the Argentinian Rangers to host that. Also, one of the important functions that we carry out as the International Ranger Federation is identifying or recognizing those rangers that unfortunately pass away in the line of duty. Now, this is important, obviously, just to give recognition to them, but at the same time, it allows us to gather important information about the challenges that rangers are facing, particularly what is leading to rangers dying, in the work environment. And is it the conditions? Is it the lack of support? Is it training? What is the situation? So this really helps engaging with the ranger associations, who the eyes and ears on the ground and are able to gather this information to be able to provide this annual report for us, which provides us valuable insight into what's happening on the ground. And then there was a paper that we produced analyzing the ranger deaths between 2006 and 2021. And it really came out with some very interesting information, not only in terms of where the most dangerous places for rangers, and it happens to be in Asia, but also what are some of the reasons that rangers are getting killed. So obviously homicides, animal attacks, vehicle accidents, and drownings, and some of those are ones that we can really influence, and through training, better support, we can hopefully drive those ranger numbers down. The ones that where rangers are passing away. As I said, it's also about gathering very important information. This was information gathered through research on Life on the Front Line, the 2019 report. Again, it helps us from an international perspective, advocating for the rights of rangers on the ground, particularly when you start looking at some of the basics which aren't being covered, where rangers, 50% of them don't necessarily have access to clean drinking water. 80% do not have access to first aid and emergency training, and so on. So, and 45% do not have access to medical insurance, which is critical. And so, at a regional level, for example, one of those things around insurance is being addressed in Africa. There is a ranger insurance for African rangers that rangers in Africa can sign up to outside of their formal employment, because a lot of those rangers don't actually get insurance. So there's through the Ranger Association actually providing that insurance option, which is a great opportunity for those rangers. We also developed the State of the Ranger report, which we sent to all our ranger associations, and they gave us feedback, and we were able to produce the first State of the Ranger report. Really, really important document, again, highlighting some of the challenges and issues within the ranger workforce, and certainly identifying areas, gaps, which we need to, as the International Ranger Federation, but also employers need to look at addressing to improve the working environment of rangers. The ranger associations also help in not in coming up with the declarations that emanate from World Ranger Congresses. So the last ones, we had the Chitwan Declaration, and that's been superseded now by the Hiech Declaration from France last year. And those declarations are, basically carry the voices of rangers. And we are in the process of developing an action plan, which will then hopefully allow for any ranger stakeholder to try and address those actions that can be supported at a national, subnational, or even regional level, and hopefully start influencing and addressing some of the points that or requests that were raised in the declaration. So one of the things that when we started out in 2020, and when there was the sort of COVID period in our lives, was to look at getting a better understanding of ranger associations. There was very little information about it, and so we set out to get a better understanding. So we set out a study to identify what were some of the challenges, why did people join associations, what were the values, etc. So these findings are from 40 associations, a number of rangers, and they were actually in-person or online interviews with individuals. So some of the results were very interesting. 52% of the associations were founded since 2010, which is interesting. The International Ranger Federation was established in 1992. The first Ranger Association was in 1966, and the next one that we can see was in 1970. But there's certainly been a huge increase in more recent times. And what is that? The question is why has that happened of late? On average, associations reported to have 8 to 10 administrative positions. Most associations have no paid employed staff, which is one of the challenges as well. There's membership fees. Only 60% of the associations have bank accounts and code of ethics. Just half the associations have received funding, and less than 25% have received funding from a governmental organization. And we see that in quite a few places where, in some parts of the world, some countries, associations can't be set up because, unfortunately, rangers associations are seen sometimes by governments as sort of being more of a union. So they don't allow that to associations to be set up. Most of the associations agreed that to increasing public recognition of rangers, providing access to training, improved training as well, improving collaboration between rangers, and increasing information sharing across different agencies. One of the challenges was the lack of paid staff, which does affect the effectiveness of ranger associations. As you can imagine, rangers are often in very far out places. Sometimes communication is not the easiest. Distances between rangers are far, but thanks to the advent of technology, there's online ability to meet now, which really does make a difference. But certainly managing the affairs of an association is more complex, particularly just the administrative part of, certainly if you are a registered association, if you've got a bank account, then you need to do financials, etc., and manage membership fees. It does become a position that needs to be filled. We need that capacity. So in terms of the high-level agreements across members and association regarding the goals of associations, there's the professional recognition really comes out strongly, and also improving and providing the training, facilitating communication between rangers is also important. And one thing that we do see more and more of is the facilitation of communication and interaction, and sometimes partnering between ranger associations, sometimes different countries working together, which we call twinning programs, which is really good to see too. In the State of the Ranger report, as I mentioned, that we ran last year, or published last year, we also had a section on ranger associations, and we found that 62% of rangers responded that they are members of an association, which is fantastic. And at the top right of the slide, you can see the quote there. It says, from one of the interviews, "I recognize the profession of the ranger could get lonely. I thought it was important to create a community." So it is really, people want that sense of belonging. They want to be part of something. And sometimes, to be honest, rangers connect. Another ranger understands another ranger best. So just in terms of what rangers deal with, the challenges that they face, one ranger talking to another does make a difference. 85% of the employers reported that the National Ranger Association communicates with their organizations at least once a year. Certainly something that comes out often with rangers is that there's not enough communication. So it's something that we're always striving for. And then you can see the other findings of why people join. It really is being part of that sense of community, to interact and engage with other rangers, and to advocate for other rangers as well. We see that quite often, certainly in areas more resourced countries, advocating for the ranger profession in those that aren't as well resourced. They promote an appreciation for conservation, and also if people want to attend different events. So there are different benefits. The main one being part of a community of rangers. That really comes out strongly, which is fantastic. But there are challenges, and as I mentioned, the difficulty of establishment. Some countries, it's very difficult to establish a ranger association. It can be costly as well to establish one and run one. Registration, and then obviously in terms of annual costs, it can be quite onerous. Sometimes it requires a level of fundraising, and again, not necessarily skill sets that reside in rangers, and rangers having the capacity to do that. Lack of paid staff and administrative burnout is a real challenge. We've seen that even within the IRF, with most of the board being volunteers. Burnout is a real challenge. Member recruitment and engagement, it becomes a focus of really trying to focus on recruiting more rangers, but also particularly focused on different groups. So looking at gender as well as age groups, trying to get youth and more involved as well. And then, other aspects of procuring resources, relationships with conservation agencies. As I mentioned, sometimes they're seen as a union. So just in closing, we have written a white paper on the role of ranger associations in strengthening the ranger workforce. But that just gives you some insight into ranger associations, their values, some of the challenges they face, but that's particularly at an international level.
Thank you very much, Chris, for putting out the scene and sharing with the global lenses what's the situation on ranger associations globally. Sometimes we tend to think as rangers only as federal rangers or state rangers, where rangers, as we have seen, for us are much more than just sometimes uniforms and a very diverse workforce. Now we're gonna go to the other side of the world, literally. As Dusty says, it's Wednesday already for Amanda Dudgeon. Thank you, Amanda, for being here today. She's going to present us about the case study of Oceania. And Amanda is regionally based ranger with the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service in Australia, and she's the Oceania representative for the IRF. Amanda is also the Thin Green Line Regional Ranger Ambassador for Oceania, and the writer and director of Guardians of Hope. Congratulations, a new documentary celebrating rangers across the Pacific. So now we go with you, Amanda, for a more regional, what we call regional is maybe it's continental to others, but I think sometimes there could be a bit of misunderstanding of the terms we use differently, right? So she's going to share us with a Oceania perspective. Thank you, Amanda.
Yes, this is sort of talking about building strength in a region. So firstly, we'll just go to framing, I suppose, the conversation of what I'll be presenting today. So we'll just look at the Oceania case study, which I suppose we figured was probably the most relevant to North America, given that the majority, particularly the Australian context, is the most similar to, in particular, the United States, being primarily government employed rangers at the federal and primarily state level. So we'll look at some of those challenges, understanding the advantages and obstacles for those state and locally based associations, as well as a regional body. That relevance to North America in terms of connecting some of those findings to your context, and also exploring the diverse range identity. So just taking that opportunity to think more broadly about what is a ranger, because it was something that was very important for, in particular, Australian rangers who are government employed, like the USPS, and state rangers in the United States, where sometimes they might not be aware of, within our region, there's a much broader definition of rangers. So I'll just kick off with, I suppose, why ranger associations matter. So it's very similar to, I suppose, what Chris was talking about, but for an Oceania context, the photos you can see there at the very top is the Queensland Ranger Association, so in the northeast of Australia. And yes, that is a blow-up hippo on one side of that photo. So this is in central Australia, in what people consider the middle of nowhere at Caughlan National Park. There are hundreds of rangers come together. It's a very big state, and it's very difficult for them to connect, even as primarily state employed rangers. Then the middle of the photo is our associations who came together at the World Ranger Congress last year to sign the CORA flag, or Council of Oceania Ranger Associations, as that tangible commitment to forming our regional body collectively and walking together as Australian and Oceania Ranger Associations together. And at the bottom is the very first association I was part of in South Australia, the South Australian Ranger Association. Many of us have green hair in that photo because of the Girls Go Green initiative. It's a very, comparatively, I suppose I've worked for, in that state, South Australian National Parks. They look after about 21 million hectares of park and only have 130 rangers in total. That's everything. So from compliance to everything else, then now I work for the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service, which is the largest in Australia. So for that Oceania context, that you've got that, it must say Oceania, because we are a region of island nations, but also we do have that sort of large continental idea in Australia where, as you can tell, it's Pernalulu National Park in remote northwest Australia, an ancient and very arid location where rangers, you are 2 to 3 days drive from anywhere. So that's anything more than a service station and a grocery store, I use in loose terms. You are very far from any form of civilization, really. So the benefits of ranger associations for Oceania is really about that peer support, because you are quite isolated, that we do have that access to training. There's training that's available in certain states that might not be available in your own or not in your country, and we can share that training across nations. Gives you that stronger collective voice, because, for example, South Australia has so few rangers that being able to work with rangers in other jurisdictions is a much stronger internal influence that they can have and voice to then talk about their needs. And also that recognition of boost to morale really is one of the greatest things, and certainly what I found being very lucky to join an association as soon as I was even just a graduate ranger. So it really helps celebrate achievement because other rangers understand you, and does greatly enhance your job satisfaction because you remember and how and why you became a ranger, and that you are part of this global ranger family, and there's nothing that makes that clearer than connecting with rangers across your region and outside of your little team, wherever that might be. So creating community really does help combat loneliness in particular. That's very important in the Oceania context because of there's a lot of underfunding. We do are subject to a lot of natural disasters, being island states. We have a very high risk of the impacts of climate change. And we also have lots of cultural and language diversity. So a lot of people won't realise that they just think of Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, when they think of Oceania. But we have many nations, including Timor-Leste, who speak a form of Portuguese. We have a lot of French, former French states and current French states, and former colonies. We have speakers of Samoan and Tongan, Pidgin, Tokpizin and PNG, Maori, and hundreds of Indigenous languages in Australia. So obviously most rangers are employed by the government in Australia and Aotearoa, but most of our Pacific Island rangers and Indigenous rangers are not government employed. So in terms of total numbers, it's almost 50-50 in terms of government employed versus community rangers and those who are employed by their what's called an Indigenous body corporate or equivalent for Māori or Indigenous Australian Rangers, where they work for community through government grants and money that they raise on their native title land. So essentially it's a region of island nations. We've got a lot of First Nations cultures, and importantly, the oldest living culture in the world of over 65,000 years, which is hard for a lot of people to get their heads around, and something that I feel very privileged to have the honour of looking after country with a capital C, as we call it in Australia. All the reserves that I manage are under native title. I co-manage them with 4 different clan groups. So it certainly makes it challenging at times, but also incredibly rewarding. So in terms of our journey to a regional unity, for those who don't know, we had Australia, just a little piece of pride, one of the first national parks in the world, not far behind you in North America. So the Royal National Park in Sydney, which is managed by the agency I work for, was gazetted back in the 1870s, and New Zealand not very far behind with Tongariro. But of course there was, before the national park concept, there was First Nations protected areas across the world, and one of them being in Tonga, which was a really important kingdom across the Pacific. So the Kingdom of Tonga looked after most of the South Pacific for a long time, so they had protected area equivalents. But it wasn't until really sort of the 1963, Victoria claims that they were the first association, still under debate. But there are many around about that time and in through to the 80s when we sort of had the formal commencement of National Parks and Wildlife Service, as they're called in our states in Australia. And then there was the collective name and titling of that role, which meant that people started to come together because there was a bit of a gap between what a union provides and what rangers really needed, because no one really understood and often still don't know what we do. So around about after the International Ranger Federation formed from 2008 to 2019, we had the Council of Australian Ranger Associations, and that was really about understanding who was who, and the different states had their own association, gradually connected, and also recognised that we wanted to see representation and support Pacific Island neighbours. And so we started to support the development of the Fiji Island Ranger Association, now the Samoan Ranger Association, and also Solomon Islands. By which time, when we arrived at the Nepal World Ranger Congress, we'd established sort of enough Pacific Islands groups and really wanted to, through name as well, show that intent towards a regional focus. So it became the Council of Oceania Ranger Associations. So we had our first forum in Aotearoa, New Zealand, in the Rotorua in 2022. which was fantastic, amazing representation, and we will be having one again next year. But we also recognised that there was a lack of involvement and active involvement in that sort of the committee and that decision making and those voices at that regional level. So we developed round tables, working with the Thin Green Line and IRF as well, to work towards a blueprint, which was all about having a greater level of inclusion and working together with First Nations and Pacific Island cultures more equally. Despite the very enthusiastic Australian voices, it needed to be balanced with creating safe spaces for everyone to be involved. So in terms of some of the challenges that we've faced in the next slide, it's really quite similar to a regular sort of what ranger associations have, which is obviously we're all volunteers. We all work full time as well, but majority, or as community rangers, they work, support their community and volunteer as community. They're not paid. So people have very little time. So admin burnout and volunteer fatigue was very important to manage, and trying to make sure we weren't asking too much of people contributing. Trust building across cultures is a really important thing, and that doesn't matter how diverse or what the diversity is in your area or your association or region. Creating safe spaces for all voices, and encouraging those who are very enthusiastic to do so on an administrative level, but to vocally make sure they create space for others to contribute, and creating even a big learning for us was smaller groups where people felt more confident speaking up, as opposed to our larger gatherings at the round tables, where until we broke up into spaces and smaller rooms, we wouldn't have anyone saying a word because it was too scary. So it was building trust and creating safe spaces. So there's no paid support. All of us are volunteers in Oceania. There's some support for some of our associations where they form really the only representation for their community ranges, such as Solomon Islands, and they have support from NGOs. But for the Australian and New Zealand context, it's just all run by volunteers. So that purpose beyond the union model is really important, in that a really great example was from South Australia, which is obviously the one I started with, and that's certainly mirrored with the Queensland Ranger Association, where the association actually forms a voice for rangers in a very positive and collaborative way. So there's an MOU between the association and the main employing agency. There's actually 3 employing agencies in South Australia, but one main one in Queensland. And the association has direct access to executive and can sit down in a collaborative and positive and open environment and sit in their office and go, okay, this is what's happening on the ground. This is how rangers are feeling, or what do you need to know to do your job better to support your staff, which is in many ways often the role I'm playing in my own state as well. That obviously there's a lot of filters that come through management, but to actually understand what a ranger is, what makes us tick, and why the way we're doing things in associations or employers might be undermining our ability to do our job well. Sometimes that message needs to come a little bit more face-to-face from the ranger, from the badge, in a really humane person-to-person way. So it's made a huge difference in South Australia, complete about face in their attitude towards rangers and the agency broadly. It completely changed how they supported the association. They actually pay for one of the dinners when we have an annual gathering each year. And we'll stand around a fire and have a conversation with, your basic field rangers or your volunteers or your seasonal firefighters. No one else, I dare say there's few places in the world that have that kind of connection between executive and their on-the-ground rangers. And that's simply through having that space in an association that says we're here to all do the same thing, the same purpose. So yeah, institutional memory is easily lost, as the quote that Chris and I both put on there. But it's, addressing the burnout issue, making sure there's the next generation coming through really helps with that. So it's a bit of a snapshot for the next slide of the blueprint, we sort of ended up with, there's a whole document, but this is sort of the short and sweet. We've got a much shorter vision. Given that we have a lot of people where English is not their first language, you had to make sure it was very accessible, but that it, importantly, between the vision and the mission, reflected not only where we want to get to, but also the way in which we do it. So it's that really diverse, inclusive and united community, which was why it took a bit longer than for some regions. And we took the time to do multiple roundtable series so that then we made sure that we were walking together and the Australian New Zealand Rangers weren't sprinting ahead as we get too excited to do. And that's been absolutely incredible. We have almost equal representation of government employed rangers in Australia and New Zealand, and our Pacific Rangers and Indigenous Rangers on our different working groups attached to each of the pillars, which is our strong organisation connecting rangers, knowledge exchange and professional development. And the idea was, we used the analogy of a fale, which is essentially a grass topped shelter in Samoa, and is also reflected in other Pacific cultures, where you come together to have important village meetings and community meetings. So we had our pillars, our mission was our foundation, and our vision was our roof, which pulled it all together. So it was really about this. We keep coming back to all of the actions and other things are the bonus, are the next step, but this brings us all together from now on. So for government rangers, why it matters, I already gave the example of the South Australian Ranger Association, but one of those big ones, peer learning across jurisdictions. So that had kind of ceased to happen. I think it happened back in the 80s when everyone was establishing, but certainly in Australia, we're seeing finally ranger exchanges between our different states. So it was Tasmania and South Australia have kicked off, and we're trying to do it with a couple of other ones here in New South Wales, and also sort of breaking down those, reinventing the wheel in every state. We don't have the skills which, like you do here in Australia, and almost most importantly, it really comes out actually in the documentary, to be honest, because that's all on the brain of editing at the moment, is that mental health, morale and motivation. So not just from our isolation, because there's mental health things, but to do with when we do feel quite siloed, when you're dealing with intense politics, and it can be absolutely crushing and crippling to your agency, and crushing when you're seeing huge changes in the parks and places that you manage, or indeed the attitudes of the public towards you, which can be a challenge in Australia. Unfortunately, not everyone loves rangers at all times, such as dealing with wild horses. So we've had rangers' lives threatened, and we've had their families threatened because of dealing with brumbies in remote areas. So having that sort of ranger family together and being able to have that voice where we can talk about the impacts it was having on rangers to agencies and outside of that as well was really powerful, and different leadership pathways as well. So we'll often share different ads for different positions coming up. So we're actually building that collective workforce across the region and not sort of trying to silo and keep our rangers to ourselves in each state. And just finally, I'll sort of sit on the next couple of slides a little bit about expanding the definition of a ranger and how powerful that can be. So I tried to look for a couple of examples in North America, because obviously we have a huge contingent of Indigenous rangers in Oceania, and many, many diverse cultures. So in the US, you have Navajo Rangers that were, I think, established in 1957 and have the same responsibilities as a lot of your classic USPS and government rangers. Also, Canada has an Indigenous Guardians program where they do that Indigenous land management and stewardship, which is exactly what we all do as people whose title is ranger. So in Australia, forest guards, field officers, interps, rangers, community rangers, kaitiaki, which is the term in Māori. It's all about making sure that, as I said before, you walk together, and it's huge to have involvement and connection with the Indigenous rangers in your region, and because they play not just a huge role in conservation, but also safeguarding that traditional knowledge and practices, and really making sure that you understand and respect and appreciate the landscape that you're managing, that has been managed by cultures for many years before colonization as to modern and New World locations, and that ultimately walking together means that you are able to help your nation and your society in walking together to look after the landscape that we're all on. It's part of being a global citizen, and that starts with us as leaders and as role models to the public of how we can look after the world around us. And for lessons from Oceania in terms of inclusion, that's the Samoan Rangers, and the uniforms they're wearing are from the New South Wales National Parks and Wildlife Service. We had a uniform change, so we all sat down and debadged all the uniforms, thousands of them, and donated them to all over the Pacific and the world. So they now have uniforms to wear very proudly with their own badges on them. So it's about that equitable involvement, really culturally safe spaces, which is incredibly important, and having those very diverse leadership voices, which really enriches your regional body, but also all of you around a region and in any jurisdiction, having that diversity in leadership. So reaching out to tribal and First Nations programs and looking for sort of formal pathways for Indigenous-led stewardship outside your normal structures of those who you work for would be a really great first couple of steps for North America in that sort of regional body context if you're working towards that. So just final thoughts. Yeah, so this is our in Aotearoa and Rotorua. In New Zealand, there's a lot of little Kiwis there, as we call New Zealanders, but from Australia, Fiji, Samoa, Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea, from all over our region, we all came together. And it was something that was certainly evident in the expedition I did, which the documentary's come out of, is I could walk into any depot, ranger office, park, and I understood them and they understood me because I was a ranger. So it's an incredible way of building unity and really amplifying impact. But keep it simple, keep it practical. We are practical beings as rangers. Face to face is very powerful for us. Rangers teach rangers better than anyone else will. No one else understands the context of our work than another ranger. That you can have all the experts you like, but they understand their expertise. No one understands that we do everything as rangers, and it should really be ranger led, and starting local, then building regional. And don't forget that within the agencies you work for, it's not just those with the title of ranger that have a role to play in your associations. We've got some great associations in Oceania where their communications teams, their visitor engagement, and other teams that have that skill set of social media and other things that is not the wheelhouse of rangers. They're brilliant at that. That's their bread and butter. So they've come on board because they love supporting rangers and now support us in our association. So it really helps with that admin burnout. So think open-minded about the workforce that you're representing and people who might be involved in your associations.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing with us, and all the everything you shared. I think it was really exciting to hear. And now I'm excited to share with you, like, well, how is this all applicable to North America, right? And we've been through global, to a continental or regional, as we call it, and then we're going straight to North America. And I want to introduce you to Mark Caughlan, our IRF representative for North America in the IRF. He's a chief ranger, Wyoming State Parks, historic sites and trails. Mark has 27 years of experience as a district manager and commissioned law enforcement ranger, and with Larimer County in Colorado, Department of Natural Resources. Mark is currently also on the board of directors of the Park Law Enforcement Association, and he has a good experience on associations himself in the US. So Mark, the floor is yours to share what are the next steps.
The biggest thing, I just wanted to put a face with a name so you know who I am and know who to contact if you have any questions about the IRF or forming an organization. There'll be some talk later on about maybe forming another North American or just American Ranger Association, what that might look like. As Mónica said, I have over 30 years as a park ranger in the US. For over 10 years, I've been on the board of the Park Law Enforcement Association. And I always share that with you just so you know that kind of my background. And I'm the past president of PLEA, and I still sit on the executive board. And what we find here in the U.S. is the last 5 years or so, we've seen an uptick in membership in a lot of organizations. People are starting to come back to organizations where 10 years ago it was harder to get members to join, but we don't see that as much now. and people joined for the same reasons as Amanda and Chris and others have mentioned, is that people really want that networking aspect to talk to other rangers, to be with folks in the same profession that could share ideas, have contacts. Just personally for myself now, as I was coming up as a ranger, if we want to put in automated pay stations or do anything different, we weren't the first ones inventing these products. So who do we know who did this and did it successfully to save us some brain damage along the way? So we had that group of people we could reach out to help us out. And also in my job now, in the last 3.5 years with the state of Wyoming, I actually started a kind of a chiefs group, chief rangers from different states and different agencies. Now we meet twice a year because a lot of our job now is political. How do we get a bill passed, whether it's better retirement, better pay for our rangers, better enforcement authority, whatever it may be, is how do you start a bill and how do you walk a bill through the legislative process to be successful to make that bill become a law in your state or in your county or your agency. So that's really been a huge benefit for me lately is to have that group of chiefs to bounce those ideas off of. A lot of our members stay because, we talked about that recognition piece, to have that awards program for an individual or an agency to help them out, to recognize that at a national level, it's sometimes we take for granted what that really means to our agencies when we bring those awards back home. And, our supervisors, people in our agencies like to, show that, hey, look at the great work that we're doing. So it's very helpful. So the question is, what if there isn't a North American Ranger Association? What would the roles be? A lot of things we talked about here, but also, hey, is there a way that we might be able to come up with some kind of standards or some kind of competencies? Would it be helpful? And this will ask all of you: would it be helpful to have, some kind of standardization or have some kind of certification as a ranger or for ranger agency? Would that be helpful to set some kind of standard, or at least be recognized if your agency or those individuals, either agencies meet some kind of, standard from an agency at a national level? Is there value in there? Is there benefit in there? That's something we've been kicking around for our organization, PLEA, for a long time is, hey, one group that's really good about certifying their group of their profession is firefighters. If you want to be a firefighter, there's a national standard for that, firefighter 1. Would there be some kind of benefit there for an association to kind of have that kind of same level of training? Granted, there's so many different forms of rangers, whether you're an interpretive ranger or a law enforcement ranger or a firefighting ranger, whatever that may be. Would there be some kind of national standard or standards to help guide agencies, maybe provide some training that people perhaps don't have access to now? That's really the thoughts about, hey, in North America, what does that look like? I think there's a couple of really good organizations out there, but would there be one, larger organization might be able to benefit us all as well? So I know we're kind of running short here on time, so I'm going to kind of leave it at that and pass that back off to Monica.
Thank you very much, Mark. And now I'm going to go with Dusty.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks, Amanda, so much. Your presentation was great, and as Mark mentioned and Chris highlighted earlier, we don't have a regional association for the United States and Canada. And so we're hoping to get one going. And so we're learning from those around us. And we thought that the National Wilderness Schools Institute would be the ideal audience to kind of start rolling this out. Basically, what we're trying to do now is gather interest. Who's interested in helping us along this path? What skill sets can you bring to maybe this group? What do we want it to look like? That kind of thing. So we're trying to fill this sort of gap that we have at a national, regional level.
I'm going to share again the QR code. If you could please go in and fill that little form, it would be super helpful. We want to gather interest from you as participants that we couldn't get on your interest on ranger associations. And after wrapping up with this message that Dusty and Mark brought, that there is no regional association in North America, but there's a potential to do it. I think we are seeing in the IRF the level of influence that regional ranger associations could have. Each of them are very different because their context is very different, but they are key players to make a real change in the ranger profession globally. So we could keep in touch for this. We're really trying to get as many rangers and equivalent as are called in the US to be part of the global IRF community. So thank you for having the time and for being here.